Tonight, for example, tonight, like beginning of the beginning of like book of the heart or something like that. Right? Yeah. Rather than stuff like that. So tonight, y'all started tap talk. Yeah. We died to at least not. All right. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. اللهم انفعنا بما علمتنا وعلمنا ما ينفعنا. اللهم زدنا علما إنك أنت عليم حكيم. اللهم اجعل هذه المحاضرة حجة لنا لا حجة علينا يا رب العالمين. أما بعد. Today, inshallah ta'ala, we're going to be continuing in the book Zaad Al-Mustaq'ni. For those who do not have the book, Sheikh, can I say that before? For those who want to follow along with the class, this is the book that we're using, inshallah. This is the book that we're using. If you have this book, it's not verbatim. It's not verbatim from that book. However, well, it is, but it isn't. What's verbatim from it is the explanation. Is the actual book itself, but the explanation is not going to be the same. The explanation is not going to be the same. As we follow along, you'll understand as we continue. Right. So the book Zaad Al-Mustaq'ni, we're going to start tonight. The book has two names. The original title of the book is called Al-Mustaq'ni. From a Shaykh Ibn al-Qudam, rahimahullah ta'ala. However, the book has been summarized with two titles. Zaad al-Mustaq'ni is one title, which is a summary of the book called Muqni'. We'll talk about that. Or the next title would be the Ikhtisar al-Muqni'. Either way, either title is the same. The author of the book, his name is Imam Abu Najah Musa Musa al-Hajjawi, rahimahullah ta'ala. He died in the year 968 Hijri, which would coincide to the year 1565 Milad. 1565 Milad. Right. Before we actually read the text, which we're about to in a minute, al-ilm, knowledge in Islam, yutlab, or is sought for a few reasons. Number one, knowledge in Islam, the purpose of seeking knowledge in Islam is to remove ignorance from yourself and from the people around you. Ignorance from yourself and the people around you. When a person is seeking knowledge or studying something important from the religion, the first thing we have to do is tasfih an-niyyah. We have to purify our intentions. Purify our intentions, right? And the goal is that we do not allow knowledge of the religion to be a reason why we enter into the hellfire. We do not want the knowledge of the religion to be a reason why we enter into the hellfire. Nas'Allah salam wa afiyah. We ask Allah to protect us from that. Ameen. Salam to Allah. One of the benefits of studying this Fiqh book is murur al-ahkam, is that we cover rulings in a religion. So a person will conceivably cover this book and learn many different things, many nuances of the religion that they may not necessarily be aware of. Another thing is we have something called a tadarruj fil fiqh, meaning that you will learn different things about fiqh at various levels. Scholars of Islam, they mention that if a person is not trying to study Islam or learn about Islam to get closer to Allah, it says, أحسن له أن لا يتعلم, that if you know that studying Islam is something that you are not trying to do to help you get closer to Allah, or rather, you use this studying of knowledge to gain position over the people, to gain status, to gain money, power, whatever ulterior motive you may have, then they say it's better for you not to study Islam. It's better that you fall back and do something else. A person also, as they mentioned, a person does not seek knowledge so that they can become known or so that they can become famous. Fiqh in Al-Islam, or Fiqh in Al-Islam, the books of Fiqh, they're broken down into 4 parts. Fiqh, or the books of Fiqh, have been broken down into 4 parts. The first part is considered Fiqh. The first part is considered Fiqh al-Ibadat. Fiqh al-Ibadat. What is Fiqh al-Ibadat? Fiqh al-Ibadat has to do with worship. Fiqh al-Ibadat has to do with worship. The second fiqh is called Fiqh al-Mu'amalat. Okay, so when we talk about worship, this would consist of praying, fasting, making hajj, making umrah, etc. Any of those things that will help a person to get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, those are the things that we cover in Fiqh al-Ibadat. Those are the things that we will cover in Fiqh al-Ibadat. At any event, the next part is Fiqh al-Mu'amalat. Fiqh al-Mu'amalat. Fiqh al-Mu'amalat will primarily consist of buying and selling. Fiqh al-Mu'amalat will primarily consist of buying and selling. And then after that, as scholars of Islam mentioned, they make it like in succession, right? So, first part of a Muslim is that you learn how to pray. After you learn how to pray, then you move on to different levels of your life. Then you move on to the mu'amalat. So you pray, you get your worship right, you start getting closer to Allah from that level. Then from there, you move on to buying and selling. Learning how to make a living for yourself. Learning sustenance, how to gain different sustenance, etc. Right? Then once you have your finances right, then you move on to the stage of marriage, having a family. It's called ahkam al-usra, the rulings as it pertains to having a family, right? And inside of that, you may potentially get divorced. So then you cover issues of getting divorced. And then inside of that, you may have children. So then you cover issues of child custody, different family law in Islam. Then, once you get established, perhaps a person may commit a crime, do things they shouldn't do. So then there's a chapter in Islam that discusses that. It's called jinayat wa hudud. When a person breaks certain Islamic rules, Islamic laws. What are some of the rules pertaining to that? And then lastly, we cover things like shahadat, like witnesses, food, what's halal, what's haram, different verdicts on people and individuals. That comes towards the end. That comes towards the end of studying these different fiqh rulings in the religion. Any questions before we start with the text, inshallah? Any questions? Shy, no questions? Go ahead. The fourth one is jinayat wa hudud, meaning crimes and punishments. That's how I would translate it. Islam has its own penal code or penal system. Some people, when they think about Sharia, the only thing they think about is crimes and punishment, right? Oh, Islam is barbaric, all they have is crimes. But that's 1 out of 5 parts of the Sharia, right? And that part is only implemented in a land where Islamic law is the rule of everything around. Meaning, we do not have the authority to implement anything from crimes and punishments in this land. Rather, you don't have that authority. So the question now is, well, who would have that authority to implement certain crimes and punishments in Islam? Who would have that authority? Huh? I'm asking you guys, who has the authority to implement crimes and punishments in Islam? Do you just take, if a brother does something he's not supposed to do, we tie him up in a basement, give him body shots? So what do we do? Who has the authority to implement that? Who?
I said here in this country, no.
Exactly. No one here in this country has the authority to implement any type of crime or punishment. Understand? So then who would be allowed to do such a thing?
Muslim ruler or the Muslim government?
The law, the government. Just like here in this country. You can't, if you see someone doing something, you can't say, okay, I'm gonna lock you up and tie you in a basement and I'm gonna sentence you here to X. You can't do that. Just like you can't do that in a Muslim country, you can't do it here either, right? In a Muslim country, there is they have judges, they have lawyers, attorneys, the same thing that you have here. Islam is the same way. The only thing is, in Muslim countries, there's no trial by jury. The judge is the one that rules in your case. Now, the judge will consult with other judges to rehash or to go over different Islamic legislation as it relates to your issue. So a person may say, well, why aren't there jury? Why is a person being tried by their peers or the jury? Because the jury, if they're not ruling by the Quran and Sunnah, they have no say. You understand? The jury does not have the right to interpret the book and the Sunnah. Rather, this is something that the people who are qualified, the judges, the jurists, this is their job to do that. Is that understood? That's to be very, very clear about that. No one has the authority to implement any form of crime and punishment in Islam. Even in a Muslim country, you don't have that authority. Even if you're the imam of the masjid, you have all the knowledge, even if you're a scholar in Islam, let's make this very clear. If a person is a scholar in a Muslim country or a mufti in a Muslim country, he does not have the authority to implement any form of Islamic crime or punishment. You can't implement that. He does not have the authority. So then who has the authority? The judges. The judges are the ones who give out verdicts and rulings. The judges are the ones who can sentence someone to a punishment, just like here in this country. Just like, is that clear? That needs to be very clear and understood. Right. All right, so we're going to get to the text, inshallah. Imam Hajjaj, rahimahullah ta'ala, he starts off his book by saying, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I don't know what page that starts off with, but if you're following along, and what is that called? The front was the title. In English, what's it called? Let me see. But just turn around. You don't have to bring it up. A commentary on Zaad Al-Mustaq'ni, right? The commentary. If you're using that book, I'm not sure what page it starts on. We're not going to be reading the explanation. We're just going to be coming from the text. The text, right? So the text itself is a book called Zaad Al-Mustaq'ni. So it says, Alhamdulillah, hamdan لا ينفد أفضل ما ينبغي أن يحمد وصلى الله وسلم على عبد المصطفين محمد. In this book, in the beginning, Sheikh Abu Najah Musa al-Hajjaj rahimahullah, he starts off by praising the Prophet alayhi salatu wassalam wa ala alihi wa ashabihi wa man ta'abbad, and it says amma ba'd. So the first thing, usually when people start off books in Islam, they start off by praising Allah and sending salutations upon the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Once they get past that part, the next process is going through an introductory of the book that you're going to be covering. So for those of you that are new or unfamiliar with the book Zaad Al-Mustaq'ni, he's going to tell us what this book is about. You can also find that in the introduction in there. And the author did a pretty good job. Whoever translated that part, they did a pretty good job of translating. He says, أما بعد فهذا مختصر في الفقه من مقنع الإمام الموفق أبي محمد على قول أبو محمد. And we're going to stop right there. He says, أما بعد فهذا مختصر. This book is a summarized version of a bigger book. In other words, Muqni' is a bigger book of Islamic jurisprudence, and so what the author did was concise it and make it small. Make it small and summarized. Fil Fiqh, min Imam. That's it right here. That's it. Yeah, I think it's good. Yeah. I meant to tell you that. Right. This is summarized in the book Muqni', right? Fil Fiqh min Muqni' Imam al-Muwaffiq. So Imam al-Muwaffiq, what they're talking about here is Imam ibn Qudama al-Maqdisi, rahimahullah ta'ala. Now, the next thing that's mentioned, he says, ala qawlin wahidin. He said that this book here was written based on one statement or one poem. What that means is, this book is, so when you read through books of fiqh, let's say, for example, we're going through a bigger book, right? Imam Ahmed, they have three positions. One position saying halal, one position saying haram, one position saying maybe, maybe not, for example. This book here, it says, ala qawlin wahidin. That this book is summarized based on one position. One position according to the school of Imam Ahmed. لا يذكر الخلاف. لا يذكر الخلاف. This book here doesn't necessarily mention differences of opinion. I need us to be clear on that. This book here does not necessarily mention differences of opinion. A person may say, well, what's the benefit in that? Well, the benefit of that is if you know many different positions, I'll put it to you this way. There was a student who studied in Genesis Islamiyya in Medina Munawwara. They studied a book called Bidayat al-Mujtahid, the beginning levels to reach and become a mujtahid, a person that's able to get verdicts in a religion, right? When they studied this book, they covered so many different things. By the time they were done, a brother told me he didn't even know how to make wudu. Why was that? Because there are so many different positions and so many different pieces of evidence, etc., that you get confused. This book here is written for the beginner student, the one that is learning fiqh, the one that is learning how to worship Allah. And so it's written in this manner so that it will be easy for the student or the learner. So it says, so the first thing is that this book here is written based off of one position. وهو الراجح في مذهب أحمد. And they say, وهو الراجح في مذهب أحمد وربما حذفت منه مسائل نادرة الوقوع. So he says that this book here is written based off of one position of Imam Ahmed. That's number one. And the second thing is that it's written based off of the strongest position according to Imam Ahmed, or the madhab, or the way of thought of Imam Ahmed. And says, perhaps I have taken away some of the issues in this book that rarely occur. So essentially what he's saying is that I concise this book, I summarize this book based on one statement, right? And the statement that I chose in this book to use is the one that is the strongest according to the madhab of Imam Ahmed. In addition to that, he said he removed some issues that may be problematic or rarely occur. That may be problematic or rarely occur. Right. What was that? What was the book you said that Roger was important lessons. All right, so Brother Saeed, Sheikh Saeed, he's been teaching a class If you follow along in that class, it's called Important Lessons. What part was that? What breaks the wudu? I'm sorry? All right, so he covered a part, and the reason why I mention this is because it's very important. For those that are following along and you don't have the Arabic book and you're learning this in English, in that book, Important Lessons, there's a part about nullifying your wudu and touching your private parts, right? And it says something again. Right. It says, what page is this? You don't know? Right. Huh? So it says explanation of important. The reason why I mention this is because it's important when you translate to understand the meanings, right? It says this is a viewpoint of the Sheikh, and it is the consensus of the scholars in a correct position, right? Here, this is an error in the translation, right? Consensus of the scholars in Islam means it means ijma, meaning you can't. It says here in English, it says this is the viewpoint of the Sheikh. If there's a consensus, the Sheikh cannot have a viewpoint in Islam. Islam does not allow for you to have the viewpoint if it is a consensus, because we said that a consensus is what? Ijma, meaning you cannot go against that. So therefore, if there is a consensus on a particular issue, then a sheikh cannot have an opinion about it. Did that make sense? Did I lose anybody? If there is a consensus on a particular issue, then a sheikh cannot have an opinion about it. But here, in this, it says what? What is the translation? I just lost it. And I mentioned this for a reason. As we follow along in this book, if the translation does not match up to what it means, we're going to make some corrections to it if needed. Yeah, so here, I don't know the page, but it says the viewpoint of the Sheikh, meaning Sheikh bin Baz, right? It says the viewpoint of Sheikh bin Baz, and it is the consensus of the scholars and the correct opinion, right? If there is a consensus, there can't be a viewpoint. There's no opinion if there's a consensus, okay? That's like saying the scholars of Islam say is, like say, for example, let's use al-civility thought, is ijma that we pray 5 times a day. It's a consensus. I can't say now, the opinion of the sheikh is that you pray 5 times a day. You don't have no opinion in that. There's a consensus. It's not up for debate. You can't have a strong position and a weak position. It is what it is, right? And that's important to note. When we're studying fiqh, it's very important to understand the text and what's being said, not just translating. Or maybe it was maybe something that the translators overlooked. But at any event, as we cover this text, it's important that we point out some of these things to the reader. So if you're reading a book, you don't get confused as to what consensus mean versus the strongest position, etc. Back to the text here. So he says, وَهُوَ الرَّاجِحُ فِي مَذْهَبِ أَحْمَدٍ. This is the strongest position in the school of Imam Ahmed. Right. So this book here contains the strongest position according to Imam Ahmed. And this is what Imam Hajjawi mentioned here. وَزِدْتُ عَلَى مَا مِثْلِهِ يُعْتَمِدْ إذ الهمم قد قصرت والأسباب المثبطة عن نيل المراد قد كثرت. And what he said is that he also added issues to it that may be issues that are beneficial, that he feels are important to be added. And then he mentioned the desire to learn. Now this is during the time of Imam Abu Najah Musa al-Hajjawi. It's during his time. He said that during my time, al-himmat qad qasurat, meaning the desire for people to learn is diminished. It's like 500-600 years ago. He said the desire for people to learn have diminished, and the need for people to learn are many. Meaning there's a need for people to learn and study. But he said during his time period, the desire for people to learn has diminished. Well, if that was then what about now? If the time diminished then what about now? And Nabi alayhi salatu wasalam He said, and this hadith is in Bukhari, لا يأتي عليكم زمان إلا وما بعده الشر منه حتى تلقوا ربكم. And Nabi alayhi salatu wasalam, he said, there's not a time that comes except that the people that come after them are more evil up until the time when we meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Up until the time until we meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay. And then he says, again about the book, he says, وَمَعَ صِغَرِ حَجْمِهِ هَوَّ مَا يُبْنِي عَلَى التَّطْوِيلِ. He said, we put this book together, a small book, so that it's not long and, expensive. And, as we had a statement from a lot of the Salaf in particular, there's a statement of Ali ibn Abi Talib and others. It says, خَيْرُ كَلَامٍ لَا قَلَّ وَدَلَّ. That the best of speech, that which is small and with the most benefit. The best of speech is that which is small and with the most benefit. Meaning it's not a lot of, how some people, sometimes you would just talk so much and not say anything. You find people speak a lot, they talk in circles, and then you ever listen to somebody talk, they just talk, and then when they think, like, man, what did he really say? You trying to figure it out. And some people like, man, he put it down. He's like, well, what did he say though? I don't really understand what he said. He talked for 30 minutes and didn't say anything. He just used a bunch of words. Right? Like, so now we're going to start the text. And he says, وَلَا حَوْلَ وَلَا قُوَّةَ إِلَّا بِاللَّهِ وَحَسْبُنَا وَنِعْمَ الْوَكِيلُ. And then he makes dua that there's no might, no power except for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that Allah will suffice us. Allah will suffice us. Right. Now we're going to start, inshallah, the next few minutes. Now I know there are going to be questions about this, and we have to make sure we're clear before we move forward. We're only going to cover the very beginning of this section here. Right. So next part, it says, Kitab al-Tahar, the book of purification. Now remember, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, and the salata tanha al-fahsha'i wa munkar, that the salat prevents a person from doing disobedience. That the salat is from the things that prevents a person from doing disobedience. Right? But then we also have a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ where he said, أَوَّلُ مَا يُسْأَلُ عَنْهُ الْعَبْدُ يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ الصَّلَاةِ. That the first thing a slave will be asked about on the day of judgment is the what? Is the salat. So then we just learned that the salat will protect a person from munkar, disobedience, and that the salat is going to be the first thing we're going to be asked about. So I know there are people that are listening and watching and say, wait a minute, I pray all the time, but I still fall short. I still commit sins. I don't feel like the salat is necessarily stopping me from doing certain things. So how does that relate to what you just said? Does that make sense? Makes sense, right? Okay. So if we look at the salat, in order for us to pray, we have to, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions the salat will protect you from doing, etc. The understanding from that is that the salat that is performed correctly with the proper wudu and a proper purification. It's possible that a person prays but don't make wudu properly. It's possible that a person prays but don't know how to recite Al-Fatiha properly. It's possible that a person prays but they don't understand the conditions of the salat and therefore they don't meet them. It's possible that a person prays, but they leave off various aspects of the prayer that is from it but don't know, right? So then this could be a reason why, and maybe a person is praying and their heart's not connected to the salah. So there are many things that are associated with the salah that a person needs to understand in order for their salah to be the way it should be. Any questions about that? Does it make sense? Go ahead, Shay. It's all over your face. Go.
So, for example,
A person is Muslim for a long time, okay?
and all this time please.
So a person has been Muslim for a very long time, and all of this time, he thinks that he has been making wudu properly. Tight. Or saying al-Fatiha properly, okay? Or praying correctly.
Then no one ever tells him
And no one ever tells him,
that it's incorrect.
okay?
So how, just by listening to this,
How would he know that their stuff is incorrect?
yes,
Learn. Sit in the class and learn. How else would you know?
I'm just saying it.
So here's the thing. The thing is this. And let's be honest. If you've been Muslim for 10 years, 15 years, it will take a lot of humility and sincerity to Allah to humble yourself to sit in a class to learn about how to make wudu. That's a conversation that person has to have with themselves and with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I'll give you an example. When we first went to Mecca to study Islam, and I sat in a class with a Quran teacher. And in the very beginning of the class, I came from America, I had a couple juz of Quran memorized, I thought I was hot stuff, right? When I got there with the teacher, he told me to do the isti'adah. The isti'adah it's not even recited, it's A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. That's called the isti'adah. He said, do the isti'adah. So I did that with him. I think he had me do it like 5, 6, 7 times. And I'm like, all right, man, like, you playing. Like, I know what I'm, like, come on. I know this isti'adah, right? I'm coming from America. I'm thinking, I got a couple of just memorized. I think I'm okay. So he says, "That it's a mistake." So now I'm looking at him crazy, like, man, you trying to be funny, man, right? And he kept saying, "No, it's wrong." He literally had me doing that for 45 minutes of this isti'adah. Now, mind you, at the time I'm 26, 25, 26. And the people that's around me in the class, they're like 19, 17. So I'm already older than them. I'm like, dang, you really trying to play me, right? Then, so I leave, I go home. I'm in my feelings a little bit, but I'm like, whatever. You know what I'm saying? I'm here to learn. But that's not where the humiliation came from. The next day, I came to sit in the class. He said, no, you got to go to another class. I said, all right, cool. I get up and walk over. He makes me sit in class of 7-year-olds. I'm 26 years old sitting in a class with a bunch of 7-year-olds trying to learn how to recite Al-Fatiha. Can you imagine how humbling that is? Here I am, a full ball short, walking around like, we got this, and I'm being made to sit in a class with 7-year-olds. To learn how to recite Al-Fatiha. We're not even talking about just Amma, just Tabarak. We're talking about Al-Fatiha. So what I'm saying is, you have to humble yourself to a certain extent to want to learn. If you're trying to learn and you have your guard up and blockers up, you're not going to learn. Does that make sense? If you're trying to learn and you have a guard up, like, no, I'm not letting nobody know I don't know that, then you're not going to learn, right? But if you humble yourself, say, what I got to lose? All right, I don't know it. Be honest with yourself. I never. How many people, honestly, ever really sat down and studied fiqh, how you're supposed to pray, how you're supposed to make wudu? I know when I first became Muslim, I had a book, and the book told me how to make wudu, and I just read through the book, and I thought I had it after that. How many people want to do the same thing? Even when it came to reciting Al-Fatiha for the Salah, I bought the Translational. So I'm reading letters that look all crazy, mumbled together, but I'm figuring that's how you recite Al-Fatiha. So if somebody would have asked me, do you know Al-Fatiha? I'm like, yeah. One time, and I'll give you another story before we get back to this. I was living in Maryland, and I walked into the masjid, and there was a brother teaching Quran there. So I prayed. I said, you know what? I'm gonna sit in the Quran class in the masjid, right? So a brother, he passed out the mushaf, the Arabic mushaf, like this, right? He passed this out to the people that were sitting in the masjid, right? Now I'm looking. Everybody has a mushaf like this in front of them, all Arabic. And it was all black like me. And I'm sitting there like, I know these people can't read this stuff. So they hand me the mushaf like this. So I'm like, they read this? So next thing you know, I said, man, so now I'm in doubt, man. These people are reading this stuff, man. They playing. And then I'm looking around, everybody was reading. And when they got to me, I couldn't fake. I'm like, look, I don't even know what's going on. I said, I don't even know what's going on. I had to turn. No, I'm serious. I tried to play it off like you know what I'm saying? And then I got to the reality was I just had to shut my book and say, look, I don't really know what's going on. I had to get up and leave. When I left, it made me realize, like, dang, like I'm really messed up. Like I really don't know how to read the Quran at all. And so the point is, you have to get to a point when it comes to learning Islam, you have to be honest with yourself. You can't sit here and that because you dress a certain way. Just because you dress a certain way is not a substitute of knowledge for knowledge. It doesn't mean that you know. You just have to be honest with yourself. Look, I don't know. You don't lose no points for that. You don't lose no points saying you don't know and you're trying to learn. You don't lose nothing for that, right? But at the end of the day, that was a humbling experience sitting in the masjid, and these are African American guys reading the Quran, and I'm sitting there looking around. I'm thinking they like me. I'm like, man, they don't know what they're doing. They just like me. And you realize everybody. Now I look back, I don't know if they're reading or not. But I know I didn't know. I didn't know how to read. And so when the guy called me, I wasn't gonna lie because he looked stupid. Act like you're reading something. You imagine acting like you're reading something, everybody looking at like this dude's a fraud, right? So I didn't want to be that. So I shut my books. I don't know what's going on, right? At any event, you have to get to a point where you have to humble yourself. And once you're able to humble yourself, inshallah ta'ala, at that point, it becomes easier for you to learn. So then, Kitab al-Tahara, the book of purification. Purification, they say, is miftah al-salah. It's the key to the salah. It's the key to the salah. In your book, do you know where that is? Do you know where we at? What page is that on? What's your first? 33. 33? 43. Look on page 43. Read that first sentence. What does it say in English? I don't know how they translated it. Shay, read that for me, please.
The author now begins writing the main body of the book.
What? Read that for me. I can't hear you, Shay.
The author now begins writing the main body of the book. Zaad al-Tahara. He begins with Tahara because prayer is the second commandment of Islam. It is the pillar of
No. I want the text, not the explanation. Find the message. I want to know how they translate it. I want to وهي ارتفاع الحدث وما في معناه وزوال الحدث.
Tahara is the lifting of impurity and anything resembling it.
And lifting is what did it say? Lifting of
impurity and anything resembling it.
Anything resembling it. And removal of filth. Okay. All right. So, right now, purification in Islam, what is it? What is purification in Islam? So, they mentioned a chapter in Fiqh. They mentioned a chapter. The chapter is called the Book of Purification. A person may say, what is purification? So, the author gives us three meanings of what purification is. Number one, هي ارتفاع الحدث. Irtifa'ul hadithi, you would translate that mean lifting or removal of impurities. Lifting of impurities, right? So, impurities here, the first part of this is something that is considered ma'nawi, right? What does that mean, ma'nawi? Something that is not tangible, it's intangible. Meaning you can't see it, you can't touch it. It's something that yakun bil-badan. It's something that the body experiences, but you can't see and you can't identify. Like what? If a person passed gas, can you see that a person passed gas? Can you look at him and say, I can tell you passed gas? But, right? This, when a person passes gas, this person is considered muhdith, meaning they're in a state of hadith, right? Like, if a person goes to the bathroom, urinates, they finish urinating, and they watch, you hear the water turn on in the bathroom and they come out, can you tell that that person urinated? No. It's not something that you can see, feel, etc. You don't know if a person is in a state of impurity. This here is called al-hadath. Anything that is within a person's body that you can't see, you can't feel, but it does not allow you to pray, this is considered hadath. Is that clear? All right, what are some other examples of that? Basically, if a person is in a state of hadith, then this is a prohibitor or something that will prevent a person from praying. So, for example, if you go to the bathroom, now you're in a state of hadith. You're not pure Islamically. A person, I went to the bathroom, I washed my hands, okay. You wash your hands, but you can't pray in that state because you're still in a state of hadith, which means you are in a state, you're not pure Islamically to pray. Is that understood? I need that to be clear before we move to the next part. Any questions about that? I'm sorry? I can't hear you. You got to put. In order to pray, you have to make wudu. Yes. In general. I'm sorry? Or ghusl. So, wudu or ghusl, if you make wudu or make a ghusl, this will allow you to be in a state of purity Islamically. Okay? So then, purification in Islam is the removal of hadath. This here is an intangible form of impurity, meaning you can't see it, you can't touch it, you can't identify it with a person. The only way you will know about it is if the person tells you, or if you see them making wudu. Okay? It's not something that you would know. If you come in here and we're praying, and you just fall out of the salat to go make wudu, that means you probably were wet in a state of ritual impurity. A better word for this is ritual impurity. I like that better. Meaning you may go to the bathroom, wash your hands, come out, but you didn't make wudu, you will be considered ritually impure, meaning religiously impure, meaning you're not able to perform acts of worship. Is that clear? So then that's number one. That's the first part of purification. Any questions about the first part? All right. The second part, it says anything resembling it. So person can say, what does that mean? In Arabic it says, وَهِيَ إِرْتِفَاعُ الْحَدَثِ وَمَا فِي مَعْنَاهُ. The second part means, or anything similar to removing ritual impurity, but not really removing ritual impurity. What is that? Did I lose you? Good, that was the point. The first part, it says, removing ritual impurity. So purification, the first part is removing ritual impurity. What is ritual impurity? What's an example of ritual impurity? Huh? How about using the bathroom? Okay? Using the bathroom is a form of ritual impurity. Okay? So it says, well, here purification is removing the ritual impurity. Well, how do you remove a ritual impurity? By what? By making wudu or making a what? A ghusl. So making wudu or making a ghusl will allow you to remove that ritual impurity. Is that understood? So then purification is removal of the ritual impurity. That's the first part. The second part is or mafi ma'nahu, or something that means removal of the ritual impurity, but not in reality removing the ritual impurity. So the second part is something that looks like removing ritual impurity, but it's not. The second part is something that looks like removing ritual impurity, but in reality you're not. Like what? Are you ready? For an example? All right. So like what will be? Ghusl al-mayyit. When a person dies, when a Muslim dies, we have to do what to the body? We have to wash the body. However, if a person's deceased, even though we're washing the body, are they ritually impure to pray? Are they ritually pure to pray? No, because they're deceased. So by you making that ghusl, you're removing the ritual impurity in meaning, but not in reality. Does that make sense? So we have another example. Another example would be al-wudu wal-ghusl mustahibbain. Let's say, for example, you have wudu right now. Right now, before Salat al-Maghrib, you come into the masjid, you have wudu, you have wudu, you have wudu, you have wudu. Brothers have wudu, sisters have wudu, right? Once you hear the mu'adhin call the adhan, you say, you know what? I want to go make wudu again, even though you already have wudu, but you want to make wudu again for every salat, for example, for yourself. This is considered in the meaning of removing ritual impurity. Why? Because you're already pure at that point. So the action that you did is in the meaning of removing ritual impurity. So let's back up. A person may say, all right, wait a minute, what about ghusl al-mayyit? If you're washing the deceased, why is that considered in the meaning of removing ritual impurity? Are you saying that a person, when they die, you're giving them a ghusl, are you saying that they weren't pure or they were pure? Like, what are you saying? Basically, even though we're washing the body, they're not going to be able to get up and pray, regardless, because they're deceased. And so our obligation as a Muslim is to wash them, even though they're not going to be able to perform any form of ritual worship. Allahu Alam, why? I used to always wonder why the fuqaha would use that. Why do you think that is? Because a Muslim when they died already pure. So even if you give them a ritual, even if you give them a ghusl, does that mean that they were impure prior? Allah. Why the scholars of the past use that example is not entirely clear to me. But for argument purposes, let's just say it's not clear to me. That doesn't mean it's not clear to somebody else. It's not entirely clear. But the example is hasil the Muslims. Allah. If we say that it's the meaning of removing ritual impurity, but not in reality removing it. Because when a person is deceased, there's still fluids that may be coming out of the body. That's one thing. So even if you make a ghusl, there still may be fluids coming from the body. Allah. Another example would be when we make wudu, right? You make your intention to remove the ritual impurity, right? So when you wash your hands 3 times, or you wash your face 3 times, right? Anything after the first wash is considered in the meaning of removing ritual impurity. A person may say, well, why is that? Why? Because the obligation is the first wash. The second and the third wash are considered sunnah. Meaning, you can make wudu by washing your hands and your face 1 time. But by you doing it the second and third time is recommended. So in that regard, it's considered in the meaning of. Is that clear? All right, so we have another example. There's another hadith that says that when a person wakes up from his sleep, that they should wash their hands 3 times before you stick your hand in a bowl. This washing of the hands 3 times is in the meaning of removing some ritual impurity, but not in reality removing ritual impurity. Does that make sense? Like, another example. Tayammum. I don't know how many people study tayammum, but we're going to cover that as well. If a person does not have water to make wudu, they can make tayammum. That's when they wipe their hands on the dust, rub their hands in their face, etc. Their hands in their face. This is called tayammum, right? They say tayammum is in the meaning of removing ritual impurity. It says yubih wala rafi', meaning it will allow you to pray, but it doesn't remove the ritual impurity, according to the madhab of Imam Ahmed ibn Hanbal, and we're going to cover that when we get to that portion. So then, thus far, we covered 2 parts. The first part is removing ritual impurities. We're clear about that? Okay. The second part is, or that which is in the meaning of removing the ritual impurity, like washing your hands the second time or third time in the wudu. Are we clear about that? Okay. So now we're going to move on to the last part of purification. The last part is zawal al-khabath. Zawal al-khabath. It means removing impurities that are not ritual. You like that? Removing impurities that are not ritual. Does that make sense? She said no? Cool. The first one was removing ritual impurities. The second one was removing something that appears in it, in the meaning of removing ritual impurities, right? The third one is removing impurities that are tangible. Like what? So an example would be a person wiping themselves or cleansing themselves after using the bathroom. A person making istijmar. If a person has to defecate in the bathroom, they must wipe themselves. This is removing tangible impurities. Let's say, for example, a person's changing the diaper of their child, their son or their daughter. And while they're changing, we're talking about the child is a year, 2 years old, and they get some feces on their hand. That feces is impure and is tangible and you can see it. You must remove that. That is considered tangible impurity, right? Najasa, the term for that is najasa, right? Let's say if a child urinates on you or you get some urine on your clothes, etc. These are called impurities that are tangible. You can see it. You can identify, or your own urine, right? You can see it. You can identify it. These are things that are considered tangible impurities that are not ritual. Ritual impurities are intangible. We can't see them, we can't touch them, and in other cases, no one else can even identify them. These are something that are specific to you. Whereas tangible impurities, other people can identify them, right? You can see it, right? These are impurities that are tangible. So then, the third part of purification is removing tangible impurities. Tangible meaning something you can feel, something you can see, you can identify. So then we have purification in Islam or in Fiqh. It has three parts. The first part is the ritual impurity, removing the ritual impurity. The second part is removing that which is the meaning of ritual impurity. And the third part is removing a tangible impurity, something that you can identify. If you understand those three parts, that is the definition of purification. We're going to stop with that. And then next week, inshallah, we'll get into the different types of water, etc., so that we can really understand it and make the connection. Before we move forward, I need everyone to make sure that they understood that. Is that clear? MashaAllah, no questions. Yes. Is that in the book? All right, read that for me, Sheikh. I don't know what it says. I don't have the book in front of me. I'll need somebody else to read it. What page is that on? Look on page 45. Sheikh. Hold on with that. Hold on 1 second.
45, number 1, under.
Oh, it says tangible in there?
It says najasa.
Oh, good.
Najasa ainiyah.
Najasa ainiyah as zawal al-khabath. What's the Arabic? Where we at? We have stated impurities can be tangible or no. It says the same thing, right? It says the former can be grouped into najasa ainiyah, that which cannot be removed by the purity of God. Or najasa hukmiyah, which blends in the middle, where impurities blemish a clean place. So what's your question? What is najasa ainiyah? Okay, so we didn't even talk about najasa ainiyah. This here is something that Sheikh Salih Fawzan brought here, but that's not what we're talking about. But since you mentioned it, we will address it. Najasa ainiyah are things that are impure in and of itself. Right now, we're talking about purification as it relates to being pure to pray. Are we clear on that? Okay. So, purification as it relates to prayer, there are three things. Removing a ritual impurity, removing that which is in the meaning of ritual impurity, and the last part is removing the tangible impurity. Like it says here, number 2. It says hukmiyah, where impurities blemish a clean place, like urine or something like that. Are we clear on that so far? Okay. Now let's go back to the other part. The other part here where it says najasa ainiya, this has nothing to do with purification for you praying or anything like that. Rather, this here is referring to things that are impure in and of itself. So for example, in Islam, dogs are considered to be najis, meaning najasa, najis, impure in and of itself. Pigs are considered to be najis, meaning pigs are impure in and of itself. Alcohol is considered to be najis. Some scholars differ as it relates to alcohol. Some say it is impure with the touch, and some say it is impure with its ruling. In any event, those are the two differences of opinion as it relates to alcohol. And as for dogs, in Islam, there's also a difference of opinion about that. Some say that the dog itself is impure. Some say that the dog, when they lick with their saliva, is impure. And we're going to talk about that too when we get to that. I don't know of any difference of opinion as it relates to pigs. Pigs are impure in and of itself. Pigs are impure in and of itself. And that's when they say impure ainiya, it means that they are impure to the naked eye. When you see it, you know that it's impure and it's not attached or associated to your prayer or anything like that. Is that clear? She said how? How? Nam or how? Oh, all right. I was about to say dogs and cats, and nothing to do with our prayer. But any other questions? See, and this is why, and let's go back to the book here, right? Sheikh Salih Fawzan, Hafidullah, may Allah preserve him. What he does here in this book is that he speaks on issues that are in addition to the text. And this is why we're focusing strictly and primarily on the text. So even if it comes up, I don't have a problem addressing the additional issues that he brings. I think they're also beneficial. But understand that when we're speaking about purification here, we're speaking about purification as it relates to your prayer. As it relates, a pig has nothing to do with you praying. A dog has nothing to do with you praying. Alcohol has nothing to do with you praying. It has nothing to do with your purification. Right now, this is called the Book of Purification. It's strictly associated with us as humans perfecting our worship of Allah. A pig and a dog and alcohol has nothing to do with that. So hence, but the Sheikh here, he's just mentioning the differences, that there is something called najasa ainiya, meaning there are things that are impure to the eye. But that wasn't his primary focal point in this particular issue here. And Allah knows best. Any other questions? Yes. So see, I knew this was an open up question. The brother says, if a dog licks you, do you have to make wudu or a ghusl? If a dog licks you, first of all, why do you make that statement? Why'd you ask me that? Yeah, because you have to have some information to ask that question.
I was told that an animal might lick you or something like the street. Dog. I wasn't sure about it.
Right. If a dog licks you, you do not have to make wudu and you do not have to make a ghusl. Whoever told you that, they're probably referring to the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, where he said, إِذَا وَلَدَ الْكَلْبُ فِي إِنَاءِ أَحَدِكُمْ فَاغْسِلُوهُ أولا بالتراب والباقي بالماء كما قال عليه الصلاة والسلام. The hadith, I messed the hadith up, but in the meaning of the hadith, the Prophet عليه الصلاة والسلام, he said that if a dog licks in a bowl of any of you, wash it 7 times, وَأُلَّهُنَّ بِالتراب, and the first of it with dirt. So a person made qiyas, they made analytical deductions. So if a dog licked in my bowl, I have to wash that 7 times. So that means if a dog licked my hand, I gotta wash my hand 7 times. I have to make wudu or ghusl. The only thing, and it goes back to the definition of purification. The third part of purification is to remove the impurity. the tangible impurity, right? So if we say that if a dog licks you, it's intangibly impure. I'm sorry, it's tangibly impure, meaning you can see the saliva or something on your hand. In this case, all you're required to do, and we're going to cover this next week, inshallah, all you're required to do is wash your hand. Just remove it, wash your hand. That's it. Understand? You don't have to make wudu, you don't have to make a ghusl, you don't have to do any of that. If a dog licks your hand, it doesn't break your wudu or anything like that. Whoever says that it does, as they say, hey, you bring your evidence to support. There's no deal that supports if a dog licks your hand, you have to make wudu or a ghusl. There's nothing in Islam that will support that. Go ahead. Any questions? Yes. Hadith. Isn't it the book? You got the book? Do you have, so in hadith is hadatha. Hadatha. Yahdithu huduthan. Hadatha. It means, in Arabic, it means something that happens. So like you might be walking down the street and someone bumps you. They say, hasala hadith. If a person's driving a car and they get an accident, the accident is called a hadith, meaning it's something that happened outside of the ordinary. So ordinarily a person may be pure to pray, and then boom, they pass gas. Hadith, he's muhdith. If a person uses the bathroom now, he's muhdith. If a person's walking around and he steps in dog mess, not that he's muhdith, but that, no, we're not going to use that, because that's the jazz, so it's a little bit different. Anyway, al-hadith is something that yaqumu bil-badan, something that is within a person's body, right? But it's intangible, we can't see it. Any other questions? So that dog stepping in dog, that's not hadith, that's something different. Just so that you don't get confused. Any other questions? Yes.
To make you do this wash.
Just washing. So I'm gonna be honest with you. That was an issue I had a long time ago. I learned about the hadith. A dog licked my leg. I did something even crazier than that. So now I gotta wash my leg 7 times and rub some dirt on it. But it's wrong. That's not the case. Right? You just wash your leg off. Just wash that piece.
What if you touch it?
The fur. So if it's wet, now first of all, that's if you consider a dog to be najis. If you consider a dog to be najis, all of the dog, if the dog is dry, the fur is dry, then there's nothing on your hand. But if it's wet, then there's going to be some remnants on your hand. They will say you have to wash. That's if you consider a dog to be najis. If you don't consider the dog to be najis, then that's fine. If you consider the saliva of the dog to be najis, but the dog itself not to be najis, that's something else. So you may say, why do some people consider the saliva to be najis and not the dog? Or why do some scholars consider the dog not to be najis? From the scholars of Islam that consider a dog not to be najis is Imam Malik. Why does Imam Malik consider a dog not to be najis? Because the further along we study Islamic jurisprudence, you're going to learn that in Islam, we can use dogs as hunting dogs for our food. So let's say we send the dog out to go hunt food for us. When the dog catches the animal and kills them, we're not required by the Sharia to wash the neck and do all this other stuff. So because of that, Imam Malik holds a position that dogs are not najis. The only thing with a dog is that if he licks in the bowl, you have to wash it 7 times, because that's what the Prophet so they have said. Some of the scholars, from that, they consider a dog to be najis, and others, they do not consider dogs to be najis. What, the dogs are najis? Majority of them. Yeah, like Imam Ahmed and others. Yeah. Imam Malik is the minority position that do not consider dogs to be najis, but the majority of scholars do. Well, is that clear? Any other questions? Yes.
So, okay.
You gotta come to class on time, man.
No.
Go ahead.
See how you say the majority of scholars are taking one position?
So you asked about the majority of the scholars taking one position, yes.
Yeah.
Then the minority might hold a different position.
But what if a person look and say, you know what, I don't understand
The minority,
the minority.
then follow the minority. Listen, the only time you're forced to follow a position of the scholars is if it's what? Consensus. If it's not a consensus, then you can follow whichever position you think is the most accurate and closest to what Allah wants. Okay? You're not required to follow a position of a particular scholar or a particular shaykh. The Sharia does not require you or anyone else to follow a specific ruling or position of one scholar, unless it's a what? Consensus. Is that clear? Class. We'll stop with that, inshallah. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.